Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a much delayed Fake Accents Unite. I apologise. I am joined this week, as always, by the Britisher. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
And by Discordia this week. Good evening.
Good evening.
I've also put a few speculative links out there to a few potential guests, but we shall see who picks those up, if at all.
So you mean to say there's a possibility of Boogie 2988 showing up?
Do you know what? I've never watched a single Boogie video, and I've never contacted him, so I'm afraid not. Not on this week, but maybe next time, yeah. But no, I've got a few out there to a few different people, and we shall see who turns up. Just to make a quick explanation of the reason why last week's Fake Access didn't happen, I had the joy of my phone breaking, plus my ISP deciding that I didn't deserve internet last Monday. So no Fake Accents last week. I know you've all been terribly disappointed by this, of course, in the meantime. But lovely to see you all here this evening. Of course, this week we're going to tackle the two biggest, I suppose, stories that are currently running around the headlines, which happen to be this entire Brexit debacle, which, of course, Britisher has done to death on this week, the week that was.
What do you mean, Brexit debacle? I mean, it's going swimmingly, isn't it? Our Prime Minister is assuring us that it is, completely under control.
Well, you would say that, you blinding leftist, but was it? You're on the fence.
I have not been photographed in a Cuban uniform next to a fellow comrade. Thank you very much.
Neither have I. I've told you that those photos were fabricated by yourself, and that's as simple as that. But there we go. Yes. Silly Sailor coming in with a £2 super chat saying, Die Hard is a Christmas movie.
No, it is not. It never was. It never will be.
I agree with Silly Sailor. And that is the unpopular opinion.
I basically refer to the, like the truthers or the birthers or whatever. There are the die-hard Christmases. And I'm sorry, it's one of these conspiracy theories which needs to be exterminated.
Die Hard is more of a Christmas film than Home Alone.
No, as somebody said, as somebody confessed earlier on Twitter, Die Hard is merely deemed a Christmas movie as an excuse to avoid watching proper Christmas movies during the Christmas period.
That's an interesting theory. I mean, I profoundly
This was actually somebody who started out from the position of Die Hard as a Christmas movie. And eventually, after I protested for long enough,
as Leo in chat says,
to basically confess that.
It has snow and you can't watch it in the summer. It's as simple as that. Liberal Zardos also is hating my position on this, but there you go. But there are a lot of people seem to be coming after me lately because I maintained the stance that busking was not begging on an academic agent.
Which, of course, you are completely correct. It can be begging in some cases, but on principle, it isn't begging.
Well, the funniest thing with it was it turned out that really, despite him just hating music in general. Academic agent
likes rap, so yes, he hates music in general.
The academic agent's biggest problem is, of course, with the concept of public space in the first place. So the idea that if he took a private road and there were buskers on it, he'd be happy enough because he knows that basically someone's making a profit. A private individual or organization is making a profit, and it's not the state. And he would be much happier if he had absolutely no control over the bylaws of an area than if he had some. So that was the main takeaway from that I got there. But there we go. Gremlins is a Christmas movie. Better Watch Out is a Christmas movie. Home Alone.
Home Alone is a Christmas movie. Yes, I'll grant you Home Alone is a Christmas movie. Die Hard is not a Christmas movie. It just happens to be set at Christmas.
Look, we're going to get nowhere on this, and I'm going to end up assaulting you if you don't drop this opinion right now. What was it like that Shapiro interview with the trans woman? Where it's like, you better stop that right now, or you're going to leave here in an ambulance. You're going to go home in an ambulance.
It
was just like,
yes,
the ambulance doesn't take you home; it takes you to the hospital. So
yes, I remember seeing him talking about that later, in which he said, he had one of those moments afterwards where you kind of, you kind of kick yourself for not having thought of the clever thing to say at the time.
Mm.
And he said he should have just looked the person in the eye and gone, "That's not a very ladylike thing to say." Sadly, that's not what sprung to mind at the time.
No, unfortunately not. But there we go. We've got. I just want to point out, as a shameless plug, that there is now a link to the Discord in the description. If any of you are interested in that.
I thought you were just about to shamelessly plug your mug.
Well, why would I do that? Everyone
in order to try and up sales,
Oh, I don't need to. You see, I'm monetized Britisher, and
that is, of course, that. Yes, yeah, but that's just due to your selling out to leftist dogma and therefore currying favor with the social media platforms.
Yeah, that sounds like something I'd do, doesn't it?
But no, I was just wondering, how your mug sales are going.
My mug sales are going fine. In fact, they're doing considerably better than the academic agent, who has sold a grand total of no mugs. And no merch in general.
So basically, there are 0 sales so far of academic agent mugs.
That's right. That I've seen. On the other hand, you are leaving us all in the dirt. So
I've seen Britisher's mug. It was very fancy.
Yes, well,
I might have to get a Britisher mug.
Well, again, yes, I can only concur. Yes.
And speaking of the,
so what is the relation? What is the proportion of, say, you don't need to give us the figures, but what is the proportion of sales Britisher mugs to not so obvious mugs? Then
you are beating your nearest competitor by about 2.5 to 1.
Ah, well, there you go.
But the
come on, people out there, surely we can better that.
You need to have
let's stamp this chap into the ground, shall we?
I also need to apologize to everyone who watched the rap battle video between myself and the academic agent. In a moment of weakness, incensed by the put down that came from Sly Sneak's "Here Comes Minion Mark," I responded in kind. But I didn't put much thought into it, really. I created this thing in about 10 minutes in an effort to prove that I could make a better rap than him without thinking about it. And so far, the polling seems to indicate that I'm winning by a margin of 2 to 1.
Yes, that one to say that you more than likely are winning there.
So there you go. Unfortunately,
if you really think we will be naive enough to believe that you put that together in 10 minutes, as you claim so humbly. Yeah,
I didn't. That was a first draft. That was a first draft with hardly any audio editing whatsoever. I think you'll find. But there we go. Oh, speaking of the Britisher enigma, though, by the way, thank you very much. You've shared your hand now, haven't you, on Twitter?
Oh yes. Well, that is, unless I was just the genius behind the camera and it was actually an assistant who was doing the stirring for me.
You hired someone deliberately. The butler did it.
A hand model. Well, there is such a thing. There are such things as hand models.
I'm quite. I like this.
Are you not aware of that? You can get models
for hands,
a particular body parts.
I am aware.
You are aware.
There's a whole joke about it in Zoolander, I believe it is.
Oh, I'm not that familiar with Zoolander. I think I kind of once rather superficially breezed through the film, but I wasn't really paying that much attention.
The second one's actually very funny. I enjoyed that one when it came out as well. The a sort of a mixture of nostalgia and amusement. But then I quite like Ben Stiller as a comedian.
I mean, the look you're giving, with your avatar, that is the Zoolander. What was it? Is it Blue Ice look, isn't it?
Something like that. Yeah. I'm sure chat will elucidate us.
Yes, no doubt they'll tell us what the exact name of the thing is.
As much as some people in chat appear to be asking me to make more music, I'm going to go with Binary Surfer, who says, "I have the music industry on the phone for you, NSO. They're begging you not to make more." So I'm going to take that as gospel, and there's that.
Well, you could of course interpret that as meaning that they just think that the competition you provide is just too stiff, so that's why they ask you not to do any more. I am told by chat that it is in fact Blue Steel.
Blue Steel or Magnum, wasn't it? Something to that effect. And they look exactly the same, but one of them can stop bullets or something, I've got a message from Elizabeth. based Liz, who will be joining us, which will be hopefully poignant because she was quite spicy earlier on a tweet I made, which I'll just pull up and I'll share with you a second if I can get past me telling you that Obi-Wan never told you who your father was.
Elizabeth is the woman who is going to be the God Empress of Mordor or something like that, isn't she?
God Empress of Mordor?
Well, she's the dragon lady.
Oh, I don't know. Something to do with Game of Thrones. Reference, you know.
No.
Right.
No, she will be able to explain it to you. Yeah.
Oh, I hope so. Yes. So if I share my screen now without exposing the link to this actual chat, that would be good. Here we are. Present to everybody. And here we are. So this is about when it comes in, we had the hundreds trying to storm the US border, and so on and so forth, legging it across there. And I just tweeted out, I retweeted it and said, what's the proportional response to this? I don't want to say shoot them, but what would be an effective deterrent? And Liz decided that I was advocating for going into public parks and shooting homeless people. And that because they were illegally trespassing, shooting them would be an effective deterrent against future
So this is
lawbreakers.
effectively the libertarian response, isn't it? That
effectively.
government response to anything occurring basically means that you...
Well, I love the fact that...
on par with the totalitarian state of the Nazis, yes.
Well, the thing was me saying, I don't want to shoot them, what do we think are other deterrents, equated in her mind to let's shoot them. So,
yes.
I'm looking forward to having that one. A bag of tea says, can you ask the Britisher if he's finished beating Dark Matter 2525's corpse? You'll have to explain this one for the chat, I'm afraid, because I'm not familiar either.
Well, Dark Matter was the person who basically decided that I was a slavery apologist.
I see. That's
after which I contacted someone calling themselves Not Sargon, informing them that until now, the two of us seem to have basically been accused of every single ism that is on the planet. Fascism, socialism, you name it, white supremacism, whatever. But that surely, with my now being a slavery apologist, I had bested him. To which he concluded, yes, I had.
Of course.
So my internet martyrdom is now superior to his.
Oh, of course. And that's the only thing that really matters to you.
Please let the hundreds of thousands of subscribers just
flood in
to my channel. Yes,
if you will. If they could invade you, invade your channel, as it were, that would be great. Good evening.
I promise not to shoot them, neither while they're coming across the border, nor while they are trying to sleep in benches on parks.
Yes, good evening, based Liz. On
that particular segue, yes.
Hello.
How are we doing today? Not too bad?
Not too bad, yes.
Oh, good. Yes, we were just discussing your interesting response to...
Well, before you go on to that, just while the topic is still hot,
yes.
Why would I refer to you as the God Empress of Mordor, i.e. the Dragon Lady?
Okay, Mordor was not the one with dragons. That was Melkor, okay, who also...
Oh, dear God.
Yeah, you really want me to get into that? Mordor was run by Sauron, who was a lieutenant of Melkor, who was the one with the dragons. But yes, go on.
Well, yes, but why would I refer to you as the Dragon Lady?
Because I have dragons. Do you want to see one?
See. So I think we've just sorted this.
Yes, we are quite...
Hold on a second, I'll get one.
There we go. Well, while she goes and gets the dragon, I'll go through the last couple of super chats so we don't get too out of date. So we've got Binary Surfer saying, Die Hard should be the template for all Christmas movies. And that's your response there, chat. That's what the Britisher thinks of that one.
Every particular Christmas movie, there should at least be one German falling out of a skyscraper in slow motion.
Yes.
Yeah.
One comical scream and a lot of Christmas music. Joan Everton says, I bet Britisher is secretly a massive degenerate. I mean, we saw how long he stewed that cup of tea for. We know
Well-
full well that he doesn't know how to edit.
Well,
And so we know that he has his tea so weak that this may as well be degeneracy.
yes, I think I actually needed this was a major bone of contention on Twitter. Would you believe it? And I actually needed to inform people that at 16 seconds there is actually a notable cut
Notable cut.
because I didn't think people would want to watch me stir a cup of tea for 30 to 45 seconds.
Well, you'd be wrong.
Well, there you go. See, we now have a dragon on screen
And voila, being presented
This
to
is-
everyone, no less.
by the dragon lady.
Behold.
Yes. He's shedding about around the mouth, so that's what this white is. That's not normal. But yeah. This is Blaze. I didn't name him. I know that's kind of a cheesy name for a
just thought
I was
dragon.
gonna say,
that
does he
white-
breathe
I just thought
fire?
that white around the mouth was, the burns from the flames.
Obviously. Protective coating, no less. But there we go. Lastly, we have so Joe Neverton proving that the Richer is a massive degenerate, and Binary Surfer
There's
saying,
absolutely no doubt about that. Yes, I'm one of the world's leading libertines.
yes, he has a human centipede in his back garden. The Binary Surfer says Trump has been proven right. RE border again, in that tone of voice, which I'm sure he would have used. So, what do you think about that, Liz? Given that it's your side of the pond, and
Well, I think you know my opinion on that. No, I think Trump is completely wrong.
mm-hmm.
Do you want me to expound on that?
Well, we are here for a stream to talk about the
Okay.
issue. You know.
I do not believe that travel should be something that is regulated for someone who is not a convicted violent criminal. If you're not a convicted violent criminal, the civil government should have no authority over where you go, other than to enforce private property boundaries. If someone doesn't want you on their property, you can't. Then you can't go onto their property. And if
Sure.
you come onto their property without permission, then yes, the property owner can appeal to the civil government to step in and regulate that or whatever.
So how does the US government, shall we say, determine who is a convicted criminal or not when they're crossing in this manner, which is to basically make a run for the border and try and leg it across?
It's innocent. It should be innocent. Innocent until proven guilty. If they have reason to believe that someone is a convicted criminal, then yes, they could stop them and say, wait, we're going to check on you, show us some ID or something. If they have no reason to assume it, they shouldn't be stopping them.
Until they commit a crime on the US side.
Yes.
And then they discover that they're there and then they get deported.
No, then they should be subject to the laws of the land. Deporting people is a very poor deterrent for committing crimes. If you
Very
say,
true.
okay,
Well, I
if
see
you rape
deported,
somebody
I
in
meant-
this
I
land, we're
meant-
going to give you a free plane ride back to your home land.
I meant expatriated. I think that's the term, where they send back to be subject to the justice of where your citizenry is.
Yeah, I'm still not okay with that. I think that if you are within the borders of a nation, you should be subject to the laws of that nation. So if you commit a crime on American soil, you are subject to the punishment that American law would mete out for that crime. That's my opinion.
Interesting. I just the problem I have with this is it's like so if in effect you're not opposed to free movement unless you're a criminal, but you're not going to have checks which ensure that the people who are moving freely are or are not criminals.
Correct. It's the same as think of the checkpoints in Nazi Germany. The government should not be allowed to just set up checkpoints along the road and everybody coming through, they say, show us your ID and tell us where you're going and why. And if you can't give us good reason, we're sending you back. You can't do that with your normal citizens, or you shouldn't do that with your citizens, so you shouldn't do it with other people either. Travel is not something that should be regulated.
Should we not be protecting the people who are already in the country? And if they are, say, convicted murderers but didn't bring any ID with them, you let them in and they murder some of your citizens, you fail to protect them?
Again, you have to, sorry. Sorry, my brain works faster than my mouth quite often, and it takes me a minute. Okay. If you want to make the argument that we should turn away everyone because we don't know if they are a convicted criminal, what you're doing is assuming guilt. You're assuming that everybody is guilty, therefore we're just not going to let anybody in. If you hold to the presumption of innocence, that is, a person is innocent until proven guilty, then you have to assume that they're innocent, unless, again, you have good reason, say a description or something. And this is why I don't have him on the desk, because okay. But it's the same way. And the idea of, oh, we have to protect our citizens, you can protect them to an unhealthy degree. If you keep your citizens in gulags, that's a good way to protect them from everything. That's not a good thing to do.
Actually, it's interesting that you say if you keep them in gulags, it's a good way of protecting them. Do you know what the name was of the Berlin Wall? You know, the wall that effectively divided Eastern Germany from Western Germany?
I don't know a name other than the Berlin Wall.
Antifaschistischer Schutzwall, which basically means the anti-fascist protection wall.
So it's Antifa's wall.
Oh, it was Antifa's wall, quite literally.
That is cool.
It was there to protect the East Germans from the fascists in the West.
Mm-hmm.
It just so happened not to, to be there and not allow any East Germans to cross it. But its actual stated official purpose was to prevent the West coming into the East.
And this is one of the arguments I bring up all the time when I'm talking to Americans who are all in favor of the wall and say, build the wall, build the wall. And I say, look, walls that are built to keep people out can also be used to keep people in. And they laugh and say, oh, that's ridiculous. And somebody actually said, no nation has ever tried to keep their citizens within their borders. I'm like, are you insane? That's ridiculous.
Have you looked at North Korea recently?
Yeah, but now Trump has actually said that he would put sanctions on certain nations from which immigrants are coming because they're not keeping their citizens within their borders. That is an incredibly dangerous thing for the president of the U.S. to say, saying essentially that the government is responsible for keeping their own citizens within their borders. All that's going to has to happen is that Trump puts this in place, that he's regulating.
In all fairness, isn't that just a less convoluted way of his basically saying these governments need to clear up their act because they are running countries that are so hideous that people are feeling the need to cross half of South America in order to get to another country?
That's not what he's saying, though. He's saying you have to stop your citizens from leaving. Now, why he's saying it is irrelevant. It'll just like why he's building the wall is irrelevant. It's the fact of what he's doing and what he's actually saying.
Some of what he would be doing, I would understand. So, for example, as I say, put pressure on the countries to actually clear up their act, because some of them are just such hellholes that people are basically just preferring anything to that. The others, of course, the other countries are effectively the transit countries, which he is basically saying, well, hang on a moment, if these people are all claiming asylum and whatever, why are they walking through a dozen other countries in order to get to us?
Well, not to misrepresent you, Liz, but I don't think that's what she's talking about necessarily, because in her mindset, there is no need for asylum at all. If you can travel, you can travel, and you're not a murderer.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a separate issue.
But I think you would agree that most people don't subscribe to that worldview, and it is those people really, by and large, that Trump is addressing there.
Which the asylum seekers?
No. Basically, most
or the people defending the immigrants on
most
that
people
argument.
don't subscribe to that worldview of basically saying, well, we should just have, we should have no borders. It's not government's business at all to deal with immigration or any such thing. And
most people don't. Yes, I agree.
But basically, when Trump is actually speaking, he is addressing the audience with more mainstream views.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes. So that's what I was trying to say.
But again, people seem to assume that the policies Trump puts in place will only be used while Trump is in office. But what happens if in 20 years' time, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is elected and she says, all right, we're implementing a 90% tax on everybody making more than $50,000 a year. And people say, you know what, forget this, I'm moving to Sweden. And she says, nope, you can't leave. You may not leave. Now what? Trump has already put the measures in place to say that. I'm not really
sure to what extent Trump has created a precedent for that, to be honest.
He hasn't yet. He's working on doing it, is what I'm saying. He's trying to. He's strengthening the borders. He's sending the troops to the borders,
Yeah,
and he is saying
not allowing people in doesn't really provide a legal basis for not allowing people out.
It's in his saying that he's going to put sanctions on countries that are letting their people come. He's essentially
Yes, but
saying
he's still not
that it
in
is
any way legislating U.S. citizens.
No, he doesn't have to. What I'm saying is he's creating the foundation for that argument to be put forth, for people to just believe and accept that it is the responsibility of the government to regulate who comes in and who goes out.
Do you believe in the idea of the nation state at all, or are you just in favor of sort of?
You're going to have to define it. What do you mean by nation? If you mean the laws of the nation, obviously, yes. I mean, I'm the one saying that if you commit a crime within this nation, you are subject to the laws of this nation.
Okay,
Don't
so
just ship back.
According to your nation, one of those crimes is to cross the border without going through the appropriate checks.
And yes, and in your nation, one of the laws is if you say something offensive online, you go to jail. You can oppose the laws of the nation while still supporting the nation having laws.
So,
I absolutely support the nation having laws.
But without
sorry,
can I just quickly intervene and ask one question? What defines your nationality?
Well, I mean, I think there are several things that do it. Nationality is
the reason I'm asking is if your view of things is that fluent, that basic, that fluid, that you could just basically go and live anywhere at any time or whatever. Does that make you a citizen of that place when you live there?
No, absolutely not. I think that becoming a citizen of a nation, that's going to be subject to the laws of a nation, yes. I think that wherever you live or wherever you are, really, you are subject to the laws of that nation. Say, if you come over and visit the U.S. and you commit a crime here, you don't have diplomatic immunity. You are still culpable for that crime here in the U.S., which means you need to be very careful. I mean, if you go to North Korea, you need to be very, very careful that you don't, deface posters and then get sent to jail. Or whatever that guy did. But as far as citizenship, no, that's completely different. I think in the U.S., even if you have a green card or whatever, you come over, you have to live here for 10 years before you just become a citizen, if you don't go through taking the test and all of that.
So, but would you allow these people, under your system, if I come to your country, for instance, under your system, and I live there, but I don't... effectively, I have no intention of becoming a citizen. I'm happy enough to sort of just exist, but I use I use basically services, including some of the state services, in effect, that citizens have voted for and are paying for. Like, will I be taxed even? As a non-citizen? Does it? And if so, how does that even happen?
I don't believe we should have welfare programs of any kind. I don't believe the state should maintain the roads. So in my ideal system, there aren't any benefits for you to take advantage of, except for private nonprofits, private charities.
Okay. Well, then let's move away from the hypothetical.
In that example of your moving to the United States, you of course forgot to mention all the tax revenue you would be generating, as part of the musical super hit double act, Double A and Marky Minion.
Oh, don't ever say those words ever again to me. But let's move away from the hypothetical then, because the system in which you're enforcing your current your idea of how the border should be managed is designed to be used in a system which is minimal state and so on and so forth. So I will
say, if I may, it's interesting that I'm advocating for smaller government. I'm advocating for less government oversight, less government control, and of people's lives, and yet people call me the statist.
That's funny, but the I guess, like, the incentive structure at the moment, that's the word I was looking for, is all wrong. So under your system, people would have no incentive to come to the US apart from general personal freedom and sort of maybe the location for work or the way it looks, right? Whereas the incentive structure today is there is a welfare system. and there is this kind of protection on citizens which they don't have in their own nation, and there also is this sort of, it's relatively safe, potentially for women and children, but also working age males can make money over there and send it home and that sort of thing, to where it's less safe. So in this situation where people are coming for in effect the wrong reasons, and I'm not saying that some people aren't going for the right reasons, because as we've seen, there are some people with young children, etc., in the last 24 hours who are trying to make it over the wall, but the vast majority, in excess of 90%, are working age men who are trying to storm the border, aren't going to go through the checks which are legally currently binding, and are, we're going to lose them as soon as they go through, and if they get deported, they're just going to come back. And it all seems to be incredibly politically minded as opposed to asylum minded, where people have jumped on this bandwagon where they're going to come to the US, and the liberal elite, as it were, in the US are all in favor of them doing this as basically a slap in the face to Trump's policies. And so they know that they're much more likely to get away with what is contravening current US law. So
one of the only reasons I'm sounding so much like a leftist is because Trump is in power. Obama was actually harsher on border control than Trump is. So the leftists would not be saying this if they weren't just trying to attack Trump. If Hillary had won, the leftists would not be.
No. This is because they don't like Trump. This is a personal attack. It is not a personal.
No, I just want to point this out. A lot of people say, "Oh, you're a leftist." I'm like, no, the leftists are only saying this because their guy is not in power. As soon as they get their guy in power, they're going to be saying the opposite, and the Republicans are probably going to be saying what I'm saying. So I've just been saying the same thing all along. Just saying.
So there we go. So in this scenario, so they've obviously been using, if I go and find the article now that I want to go through, because we're already half an hour in and I had intended to get things going, but here we are. So Migrant Caravan, interesting, Mexico is getting heavily involved in this. But they're denying a US border deal because I think it was 70 or 80 immigrants were moved away by the Mexican officials on the Mexican side. So here we go. So the foreign minister said discussions on how to deal with migrants traveling to the US are continuing, despite reports a deal has been reached. Denied reaching an agreement which would see asylum seekers waiting in Mexico while their claims were processed. And again, this is one of those weird things, because am I right in thinking that you can request asylum from both outside and inside the US, but if you do it from inside the US, it has to be within a year of your arrival?
I'm not sure the details on the law, but I do know that you can come in and then seek asylum after entering. Yes.
Yeah. And so on. Donald Trump, I love this. Mr. Ebrard's words seem to contradict US President Donald Trump's latest tweet. The official word of the president through Twitter. It's immediately binding as soon as it goes through Twitter, as we go. We'll see, what's his name? Jack, whatever, who runs Twitter, who owns it. Be like, he's actually the foreign correspondent for Donald Trump's government. He said migrants would not be allowed entry until their claims were approved. So that's what Trump wants, and that's what Mexico is saying. We haven't reached that yet. Donald Trump is stating what he wants.
But if you read, what does he say there? No, or if you read the next paragraph.
Migrants at the southern border will not be allowed into the US until their claims are individually approved in court, Trump wrote, adding, no releasing into the US, all will stay in Mexico. I'm gonna see if I can just pull up the tweet, so I'm making sure we don't get... Yeah, all will stay in Mexico. If for any reason it becomes necessary, we will close the border. There is no way that we will, after decades of abuse, put up with this costly and dangerous situation anymore. So that's Trump on that one. Interesting. That's not what this paragraph says, but there you go. Or a really convoluted way of saying it.
Yeah, he seems to be contradicting himself.
But there we go. Anyway, but we all know his problem with people in border cities and towns and so on. The plan was called Remain in Mexico, and so on. You're being very quiet, Disco and Britisher. Have you got anything to say? Are they even still here?
I'm
This is the
sorry,
question.
she's
About.
listening
Yeah,
to
yeah,
the
we
reading.
just
I mean,
about
you
still.
I don't want to interrupt Liz when she's telling us.
No,
Well,
no
yeah,
one wants
once Liz gets into her liberalist groove, what can I say?
You'll
Yes.
was
Sorry.
it throw
Because
start
we
throwing
then just enter, you know, we then quickly enter the sphere of just basically talking about liberalism per se rather than about the borders, if you know what I mean. So
Yes.
therefore one just tries to steer clear of getting into the overall sort of liberalist Holocaust debate again, if you know what I mean.
Interestingly enough, most liberalists disagree with me on this point. I mean,
Well,
even
interesting.
Sargon disagrees with me on this point, and he's like one of the founders of the liberalists.
Yeah. I'm just going to go through the last two super chats that I've had. Liberal Zardos says Randy Quaid emptying skeptic tank in a bathrobe. I have no idea what this is in reference to. If you just message normally in the chat, I'm sure we'll pick it up. But that seems an odd image to send. Binary Surfer says, I'm sorry, but they are all criminals the second they attempt to enter via anything other than legal channels. Fact, end of, it's a crime.
This is, again, though, why I differentiate between crime and violent crime. There was a family from Germany that came over to the US because they wanted to homeschool their children. Their children were being indoctrinated with the socialist propaganda in the public school system in Germany, and they didn't want them to have that teaching, so they wanted to homeschool them. And the German government ruled that they were not allowed to teach their own children and threatened to put the father in jail. So what they did is they came to the US and sought asylum, because I think homeschooling has been declared a human right. I don't know if it was just in the US or somewhere, but it was said that, yes, this is a right, therefore it is a legitimate cause for seeking asylum. They were criminals because they had committed a crime in their home country. They were criminals when they came here because they were actually denied entry. That was when Obama was in power, and he said, no, even though this is recognized as a human right, so this would be a legitimate cause for seeking asylum, we're not going to let you in. So yeah, they were criminals. They were not violent criminals. I do believe they should have been let remain here. So people crossing the border, yeah, that's a crime. I mean, Count Dankula is a criminal because he published a joke. That girl, who I can't remember her name, Chelsea Manning or whatever, she's a criminal.
Chelsea Russell, yeah. Chelsea Russell.
Yeah, Chelsea Russell. She's a criminal. She's not a violent criminal. That's why I differentiate.
Asylum is one of the things which asylum is one of those things where we as part of the international community deem that the ruling of a nation or people is, because that includes mob justice, is effectively, beyond the pale, is not fair, and they have a right to seek asylum there. It's like they've been accused of committing something which they should not be. They're receiving a disproportionate punishment for. So it's things like, like Asia Bibi or whatever from Pakistan, who was
Another good example.
Convicted of blasphemy. But obviously, we don't think that you should be put to death and have your head cut off for blasphemy. And so she can apply for asylum, and she has. Although it's disgusting that the UK denied her request. But the what it is you go, when someone tries to cross the border illegally, like the act of crossing the border is a criminal act, is what Binary Surfer is getting at. He's not saying they're coming and they've already committed a crime somewhere else. He's saying they've come to the border, and we treat you would hope that you treat everyone equally. If you try and cross the border without going through the proper channels, you are committing a crime. De facto, you become a criminal in doing that act.
So you're committing a crime in the country that you're entering.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's my point. That's why I differentiate between violent and non-violent criminals. Yes, at that point, they are now a criminal, but they're not a violent criminal. Therefore, so that's what I'm saying. And by the way, I don't think that travel should be a crime.
I mean, a lot of them are hurling rocks at the US border agents at the moment.
Okay.
Pretty violent.
Yes, that would be a violent crime.
You know where the term asylum actually comes from?
Do tell.
It actually goes back to, I believe it was the saddle between the two peaks of the Capitoline Hill in ancient Rome.
1 second. I have to go. I have to craft a jingle
Okay.
that says Britishers anecdote time. Like whenever we do this sort of thing, right?
Well, no. What it basically when Romulus had basically founded Rome, he had a place, but he didn't have a population. And effectively, he said that anybody who would come to Rome and basically would come to the asylum would effectively be granted asylum. He would be granted stay in Rome. And like that, he kind of got himself a population. So the Romans themselves believed that they were made up of criminals and runaway slaves originally. And of course, that meant that they were overwhelmingly male.
Yes.
And that's why they needed some women, which is where the tale of the rape of the Sabine women came from. This is one of the things in the English language that people always get confused about. If you look at the word rape, it actually, in its original origin, means the theft, the stealing of. So when you talk about the rape of the Sabine women were a tribe nearby. It basically meant they basically stole away the women of the Sabines, so that basically all these men could have some women, and like that, Rome was effectively born.
So we've worked out that Britisher is not only a slavery apologist, but also a rape apologist.
Oh yes, of course.
In this.
And yes, I would point out that, of course, there is a statue I pointed to in my recent sculpture video, which is by Bologna, which is precisely that. Is the rape of the Sabine woman, and it's a fantastic sculpture.
Well, there you go. Another fascinating story from the Britisher on the birth of another word that we use commonly today. I hope you'll tune in next week where he goes over the birth of rivers. All right, there we go. Joe Neverton says, thoughts on localism? I'm not a hardcore localist, i.e. regional subsistence production only, but I do think it has many useful ideas, especially for libertarians. Do you know anything about localism, Liz?
I'd have to look up the definition of that.
Well, effectively, it's meant as a counterpoint to globalism, isn't it?
I assume
Is
so.
it the forced subsistence within your area, saying if an item is for sale in your area, produced in your area, you must buy it from them rather than from outside?
I do not know.
I'm going to look it up real quick.
We look it up. We may do another stream later this week on localism. Then, if it proves to be interesting enough, I'll try and bring AA on it because I'm sure he'll have some interesting ideas and no doubt knows all about it.
Dear God, they're going
There
to
we
be
go.
rapping about localism.
I won't bring on the Britisher because he'll put us all to
I can
shame.
hear it now. The localism rap.
Okay. Well, it's from what I see here, it says localism describes a range of political philosophies which prioritize the local. Generally, localism supports local production and consumption of goods, local control of government, and promotion of local history, local culture, and local identity. So I have no problem with that. I mean, if you're supporting it, if you're encouraging it, there's nothing wrong with that. Assuming you're not encouraging it using force or using, say, taxes or something like that. If you are subsidizing local businesses, no, I do have a problem with that.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of which was similar was tariffs on international steel and subsidies for local steel, which was very good for the American steel industry and not very good for the steel industry as a whole, or the thousands and hundreds of thousands of jobs that were lost internationally.
It was also not good for American businesses that needed steel because it drove up the price of steel.
So there we go. Working class liberalist is still hungover in chat. We went out on Friday evening, so that's quite impressive. Although I assume he didn't stop drinking since there. Yes, I went out on Friday to one of Sargon's live events in London, which was quite good fun. Met up and ended up in a casino with Dankula at 3 a.m. It was bizarre, but there we go. Let me see. John Stewart in chat says Jim Acosta's confrontation with Trump was all about how the migrant caravan was 700 miles away and they've arrived at the US border only days later. They can walk quite quickly, can't they? the
That's impressive.
it is quite impressive, really. But I don't know how big it ended up getting, because it was only about 1,000 people at that point that I'm aware of. But I've not seen any number estimates. All I've seen is some videos of a couple hundred people.
I've seen some pictures and videos of people getting on trucks. So obviously, if you're on trucks, you're moving faster than the other chaps who are walking. So it may well be that the mother load, so to speak, is still walking, but that some people have obviously got there much sooner because they were moved on trucks.
There are fears migrants could be stuck in temporary shelters for months, and this is one of those other problems where I go basically blindly trusting that you're going to arrive at the border, and you will either find somewhere to hunker down, or you'll simply be let in and given shelter, be it in a processing center, hostel, or some other form there, knowing that you have nothing but the clothes on your back, as it were. This causes a problem, and so it's sort of like migrants could be stuck in temporary shelters for months, and it's sort of like, how is that the US government's problem, as it were? And the only reason it is a problem is because of the tensions that it will cause between the two different sides of the border patrol, and the problem of the fact that you don't really want starving people on your side, particularly next to a desert, effectively.
Where else are they going to go at that point? If they only have the clothes on their back, they can't afford to rent or buy a house. They're going to spill out onto the streets unless you give them welfare.
They haven't come with the ability to support themselves with work waiting for them, or families, or anything like that. This is problematic, as the left tends to say. Do we have any?
You want me to jump in?
Well, yes. Do we have any solutions for today, Liz, as opposed to in the libertarian, not libertarian, the almost libertarian utopian?
As opposed to?
As opposed to today.
I don't know. Are you saying what's the solution without letting them in? Is that what you're asking?
Well, no, I'm saying what's the solution today? If let's say, Liz, you are now in control of the borders. In today's system, you've only got control of the borders. You can't remove welfare or anything like that. What are you doing?
I would still let them in.
Okay.
Where are they going to go? They don't have any money. They don't have a job. They don't have any documentation to get a job.
They will find work. There are a lot of illegal immigrants in the nation right now that do work. And I work in bookkeeping, and I have worked with small businesses that have hired illegal immigrants. And I've told them, you got two options here. One, you don't tell me about this and you tell me that they're fired, because if I know that you're doing something illegal, I'm not going to work for you. And it can't be on the books. If it is, I'm not going to work for you. Or you keep it up and you go find another bookkeeper. I will not break the law. I will not help people break the law. However, I will express my disgust with the law when I think it's immoral, and I will try to get it changed if I think it's wrong. So I know that there are a lot of people who hire illegal immigrants. I know that there are immigrants that find work, usually on farms, or construction or things like that. My father works construction, and it annoys him when other companies hire illegals because they can pay them a lot less, which means that they can undercut my dad. They can give lower bids because they have cheaper labor than my dad has, because he won't hire illegals, even though he actually has. He has hired illegals unintentionally, because a lot of them do have ID that it's fake ID, and they don't realize that. So they'll give him ID. He assumes it's legitimate. He brings them on, and he says they are amazing workers. They work so hard, and they work long hours because they're used to hard work. They're used to working to survive. Unlike Americans, who are used to just clocking in at 9 to 5 and then let me off and doing what needs to be done, and on their cell phone half the time. Dad loves these. If he can find legal immigrants, those are the people he wants to hire. And if they're illegal immigrants and he doesn't realize it and he hires them, he's like, these guys are awesome. And then he finds out they're illegal. He's like, oh, great. Now I have to let them go. I can't keep them on. But yeah, they're wonderful workers. Most of them. And obviously not all, but most of them really are good.
I mean, I mean, just
They're not going to be able to work office jobs. They're not going to be able to work your middle class jobs. Middle class
No.
people can't understand. I see. I grew up below poverty level. My dad was making minimum wage with 5 kids. I know what it's like to have nothing, and people can survive with nothing if they work hard. These immigrants, you say, oh, they're coming in here with nothing, they won't survive. No, you would not survive in their position. But trust me, they can survive and they can thrive.
If you're paying them less than your own citizens, and they're not paying tax because they're not registered, is that not trashing your economy?
Not
I mean,
necessarily.
if there's thousands of them come, or hundreds of thousands of them come because you opened the border up, is that not going to trash your economy in the long run?
I mean, it
No.
depressed wages already in the areas
Yes.
where they settle.
In the long run, yes, it will depress wages. But in the long run, if it was allowed, it would also depress prices. See, again, my father, like I said, he gets undercut. People will bid lower. They will charge less than what he will charge for the same job because their wages are lower. So if this was long-term solution and if this was allowed, everybody's prices would be lower because everyone's trying to compete. So they hire people paying them less and they're charging less so that they can sell their product or their services. So it is kind of an offset.
One of the reasons that they can afford to pay them less is because most illegals don't pay tax.
You'd be surprised. Actually, a lot of them, there are a lot of people who will take advantage of illegals. They will say, here, I'm going to pay you this lower amount. And they say, but here, I'm going to take out this much for taxes. And they tell them that they're paying taxes. And the illegals they don't know how it works. They just know the employer is supposed to take out taxes. And what happens is the employer is just pocketing the money. So they're paying them even less than what they said they're going to pay them. And just, like I say, pocketing the difference. So they're not. So a lot of illegals actually believe that they are paying taxes.
The reality
pretty
is
sad. No, they're not. But
it's not going into your economy to pay for your welfares.
It is a complicated system, yes. But most illegals are also illegals can't get welfare in the general, like food stamps, things like that, in most places. Yes, I understand California gives it to illegals, but most places you can't do that. You have to show like 2 forms of ID. You have to show these different records. So most illegals can't get straight up welfare.
No.
It's like Social Security. I mean, Social Security is kind of a form of welfare for older people. You can't get Social Security unless you can prove that you've been paying into the system for a certain number of years. So there are a lot of things you can't get if you don't have proof of citizenship, proof of residence. You can't vote unless you can show proof of residence, and you can't get a driver's license unless you can show 2 separate proofs of residence from. You have to have like a statement from the bank and a statement. So it's not as easy just walking in and saying, "Hey, I want a driver's license," and they say, "Here you go." It doesn't work like that. It is a lot more complicated. Ask any American how hard it is to get a driver's license. How many hours do they spend in the DMV? It's like you can't just walk into some place and get welfare.
I have heard jokes about the DMV, yes.
I guess the thing that this all comes down to that I really get is you believe that you effectively have a right to travel where you want and not to be impeded, provided you've not killed anyone or committed an appropriate crime. And we're saying on our side effectively that borders are important because they protect it's like a barrier around culture, and so it's sort of the
no, it's not.
So this is what I'm going to say, right? Is it sort of, because I was thinking about this a lot. There are natural borders and there are unnatural borders, and why do unnatural borders create? It's like where there have been historic clashes between people, or where the state cannot overextend for whatever reason. That's where borders tend to pop up. There tends to be sovereignty and relative peace. That's not to say borders don't shift around or completely change over time, but I just go, the borders, I think, are there for more of a reason than simply to be a pain in your way, basically. I think there is a reason there is a border between the US and Mexico, which is not that just the US government selfishly wants to know who you are when you cross that border. and that side of things. Can you think of any other reason why there should that a border would exist, Liz?
There are lots of reasons why a border would exist. So you want me to just start naming them? I mean, I think the main legitimate reason for a border is to determine jurisdiction. Sorry, I couldn't. To say whose laws apply. If you go to Mexico, you're under Mexican law. If you come into the U.S., you're under American law. That is the main reason you have borders, is so that people know what laws they need to obey, know what is expected of them.
Well,
you can also say borders are for taxation purposes. You can say for sales tax. We have so many different types of tax in the U.S. For employment.
But for you, it's nothing more than an arbitrary line on the map which determines where that ends, and that's all it should be.
That depends on your definition of arbitrary.
Well, to you, shall we say, there should be no wall, no line. It could be drawn on the map, but realistically, as long as everyone knows it's there, it doesn't really matter.
It's kind of like the boundaries of my property. Are they arbitrary? My personal property. I mean, technically they are, because it's the border that is agreed between me and my neighbor. And it's written on tax documents that say, legal documents that say, here is the border of my land. There is no intrinsic thing or whatever, whatever the word is. There's no thing around the land that says this property all exists belonging to this homeowner. This property belongs to this house, and not an inch further. No, it is sort of an arbitrary line in that there's nothing outside of the legal documents that define it.
Okay, and so the US border is effectively what you might call, it's the public property of the US citizenry.
No, I may be misunderstanding your question. I noticed the chat is like, "Oh, Liz is dodging the point." I'm like, I don't understand the question. I'm guessing.
I don't think you're particularly dodging the point. I made a point about culture, which I think is what they're getting at.
Okay, as far as culture, I laughed and I said, no, borders don't protect against culture unless you're in China, because a lot of culture comes from the internet. The U.S. culture has been influenced, to a big degree, by J.R.R. Tolkien. How many Americans are obsessed with Tolkien and Middle Earth and hobbits and all of that? That is culture from Great Britain that has infiltrated.
Cultural influences,
yes,
do exist, yeah. But I'm talking about
the UK is invading America with Tolkien and Doctor Who.
No, a cultural influence is crossing, right? But that doesn't necessarily come. It doesn't necessarily come with people. And if it does come with people, then those are people who have agreed, as you say, to the jurisdiction of the US. But also, when I'm talking about culture, it's like, here's the majority culture of the US, and here we go. Why do you have state lines at all within the US?
State lines originally were, I'm not going to go into the historically why they existed, but why they exist now is, it's for political reasons. It's for taxation.
Okay.
It's for laws. We have different laws in Florida than we have in California, things like that.
I think Dominic's got a good way of putting this. He says, you can't enter, so I can't enter your property without permission, effectively. How is this different with a nation state?
The difference is that when you put a boundary around a property, again, you're determining not just who can come in, but who can't come, who comes in and who goes out, whatever. You're saying this person can come in, this person cannot come in. And when you put a boundary around the US and say, okay, these people cannot come in, what you're saying is I am not allowed to determine who can come on my land. I'm still allowed to determine who can't come on, but I am no longer allowed to determine who can come on. So these illegal immigrants, let's say I say, okay, here, I want to take this family and let them move in with me so they have a place to live, help them find a job, help them get on their feet, and then until they can make their own way. I cannot do that. So essentially, these border restrictions,
because you can't know everyone personally at the border, And because not every US citizen can, so that you can't act effectively via direct democracy to decide who's coming on and why, and not always going to be unanimous either. I mean, not going to talk about the Brexit split there, but there you go. But the and because of this, you need a method of determining, who you're going to trust to give permission to come on your property. And it's not about who you keep out; it's about who you want in. In the same way that if I came up to you as a stranger and you're on your property, you could make the decision that, let's say, you don't want me if I'm someone who's going to be dropping junk mail through your door every day. But if I was a close personal friend, you do want me on your property. And so you have this similar thing on a national scale. But this is why you have obviously the legal channels with which to enter the country via asylum and legal migration and that sort of thing. Because there is no, at the moment, and until someone comes up with a better way of doing it, there is no other way of determining that someone is effectively someone you want to come in.
Mm-hmm. Two things. First off, I notice I'm kind of dominating the conversation, so please, at any point, tell me to shut up and let somebody else talk.
We'll be moving on in a little bit, but if we come to a stalemate, we come to a stalemate. But we'll
okay.
But go on.
Second, I will say this is an issue that really comes back to whether you believe that property rights should be individualistic or collective. In every society, you're going to have some things that need to be collective and some things that should be individualistic.
Yes.
And the left and the right disagree so much on that. They say, the left says these things should be, almost everything should be collective and very few things should be individualistic. The right says almost everything should be individualistic and very few things should be collective. I believe property rights should be individualistic, not collective. And people who are advocating for border control, for control of immigration, are saying property rights should be collective, not individualistic when it comes to people traveling, essentially. So really, that's what it comes down to.
Okay. Well, we've heard both sides of that argument then, and we've done it pretty much to death. And I think poor Britisher and Disco is sitting there going, oh my, it's like Ray's on Unpopular Opinions again. No, I'm joking.
I'm quite interested listening to this. It's an interesting topic.
The British has gone there. We've had a couple of super chats in there. I have a fascinating one called Message Retracted for £5. So there you go. And Joan Everton says, as words are redefined, etymology becomes crucial. Yes. Very true. Like, this is one of the biggest problems in the dialogue between the left and the right. Not that that's an appropriate comparison of the conversation we've just had, but where people do not have the same definitions for the same words and so on and so forth. So it's very, you need to maintain, when you set out an argument, you need to be able to agree on the definitions for these things. But, I shall leave it to we've made both our cases, so I shall leave it to the chat to make up their own minds. But there we go. So it's going saying British is recharging his voice box. I think that's probably true. And we're going to move on to from the US border to somewhat closer to my home in the UK. And we're going to talk about the deal that Theresa May has submitted. In an absolute nightmare of a week, really, just in general. So there we go. Now, Britisher, what don't you want us to talk about? Because you've obviously been through this, so I'm going to try and keep it low, up to date rather than going over the points which were made in, I guess, on the week that was last week. So Theresa May has, in fact, I'll screen share this just for the sake of ease, present to everyone. Here we are. Theresa May has defended her proposed Brexit deal in the Commons in the face of sustained criticism from the opposition and many Conservative MPs. I believe at the moment that her approval rating is something in the region of 5 to 7% cross-party.
It's that high?
And yet when she goes on BBC radio to talk to the people, there are lots of people calling in telling her how they agree with her deal.
Is that
for
true?
asking the question. Yes, I found that rather remarkable.
I do.
Yet to see one of these people exist anywhere online.
Yeah, or indeed to a great degree in reality. I know a great deal of Remainers who are very upset that
Well, it's
they
the same
wanted to.
thing like with BBC Question Time, when once upon a time they always told us that the audience reflected a fair representation of the population. Now it's just made up of activists.
Yeah, entirely possible,
Oh no, I mean now you do not have any random people in the audience anymore. You know full well they're all exactly divided between whichever place they go to, the local Conservative and Labour and Lib Dem party activists and so on. So that entire format has long since been subverted.
I see. You don't appear to have much support in chat, apparently, Liz. Sorry, just although it appears that lots of people are voting twice. But there we go. Yes, I see what you're saying, Brisha, about the activist side. Theresa May said the deal delivered on the result of the EU referendum. I find that funny after I've seen two videos, one with Jacob Rees-Mogg and another with another, I believe it's a Conservative MP, although I could be wrong, who also is basically laying into this thing and saying that she's basically written, there's not a single promise that she made regarding this deal that she actually kept. And in fact, in the vast majority of cases, it's the exact opposite. Pretty horrendous. She admitted she was not entirely happy with the backstop contingency plan to avoid a hard border in Ireland, no doubt because she didn't capitulate on that one enough. And Jeremy Corbyn said, ploughing on with a deal opposed by the public is an act of national self-harm. And now I find myself loath to agree with Jeremy Corbyn.
I know, we found ourselves in that position, haven't we?
And we're in that position where I genuinely believe, should we have an election, the way he's playing this, we're going to have the Labour government the next time round. Yep. I'd be curious to see what's going on. And I just hope that UKIP don't get too egotistical, I guess, about their influence as yet, to the point where they're blindingly disappointed come the results of the next election. But there we go. The Labour leader suggested Parliament would have little choice but to reject the deal when MPs vote on it. Well, that is one benefit, is that it's there. But the question, of course, on everyone's mind is, them voting that down, does that mean leave with no deal? Or does it mean second referenda? And that is the question. But there we go. There was a 2.5-hour debate. Did anyone watch that debate, by the way? Because I've not seen any.
Not yet. No, I haven't seen it.
Nothing publicised. Well, this was, as we say, just an hour or two ago. So there's that. So May pitched that there have been give and take in that, mainly a lot of giving and no taking.
She's been giving and they've been taking. Yeah, I mean, she's not
been
wrong.
Taking it in the 19 months of negotiations. And I've been watching a lot of woke Hitchens recently, like Peter Hitchens, who has obviously been a Eurosceptic for many years. And so he was talking about how it should have been done and the fact that the idea that people who really... I think one of the biggest problems is that the Remain side don't understand how the EU works either. And so... and also Theresa May was absolutely desperate to stay within the customs union. So I guess it was just like, I'll deliver on the mandate apart from this one thing, and then she's capitulated all this other stuff, including things like there's something about Gibraltar, isn't there? Where
every time she sort of said she wanted to stay in the customs union, they would be like, "Oh, we'll veto you if you don't agree to this." So she had to agree to it.
Let me see. We are proud Gibraltar is British. Our positional sovereignty has not and will not change. But there's something about sharing something in Gibraltar. Like, given that Gibraltar is effectively just a small spit, but it is our spit.
And given that they have two spits on the other side.
Yes. Like, they should learn to share better, or not share enough. it's just so strange. Like to me, this entire thing is not necessarily that she's not trying; it's that it's the sheer level of incompetence, and the sheer lack of knowledge about how our own country runs, what we can run, what we should run, and then how to convey the will of the people to that. So and also this sort of fear, and this terrible fear that if we leave the European Union, Europe will not trade with us, which is this bizarre thing. It was either it's the customs union, or in the single market, or it's nothing. Whereas the of course most sane people are going, look, we contribute something like £50 billion to the automotive industry in Europe alone. Don't quote me on that figure, but I think that's correct. And so the idea that if that was stopped for even a day in profits and so on and so forth, the shock, who would capitulate first? Is it going to be Europe, or is it going to be us? If we don't get cars and so on and so forth, and they lose so much revenue from us not doing that, and the incentive for them to forge an equitable trade agreement with us is much higher than the need for us to stay within the single market and the customs union, where we have the freedom to obviously talk to and form trade relationships with other people, including the US, who basically offered a trade deal on a silver platter.
Didn't we throw that back in their face?
Well, Theresa May not only laughed at what Trump was saying. I mean, he said, she said that he had said to sue the EU, and what the press secretary for the US said was something along the lines of, I can't remember her name actually, but she basically said, if you take, Trump is a very blunt man, and you have to take some of what he says with a pinch of salt. But
Really?
yeah, it. But the impetus of what he's saying is, you've got to drive a hard bargain so that you can come to somewhere in the middle in the end. And there never at any point seems to have been a hard bargain or any kind of real I guess utilization of bargaining power by our side against the European Union during the whole of this negotiation.
Well, put it like this: when it comes to this stopgap agreement, it seems to be an agreement from which we can only exit by joint agreement. Basically, if you consider it, if we want to leave, then that's one side already sorted. So if we want to leave this agreement, then basically it's not a matter of a joint agreement. It's a matter then of whether the other side agrees to it or not.
Yes, and that's the other thing. Is
essentially the wording is, oh, well, by joint agreement or whatever. But what it effectively means is if we want to leave, we need their permission.
Yeah, which is
now,
bullshit.
Yes.
If you consider that we basically, when we were in the EU, we had Article 50, as in we could leave. We are now going to exchange that for a backstop agreement, which is going to be the basis for negotiation for the trade deal.
Yes.
We're going to get into a backstop agreement from which we can't leave. So the negotiation for leaving something is to enter something else from which you can't leave.
Well, I think it would be interesting, if you treat it as not legally binding, and we go, that's enough, and we won't do it. So if we said we're leaving, and they go, well, actually you need our permission for that, and you go, no, we don't, goodbye, we're not paying you another penny. That would be ideal.
I mean, Jacob Rees-Mogg said it today.
We pay them for the privilege, don't we?
Oh, £39 billion.
Yeah, what if we actually bought for it? That's what he wanted to know.
Jack all.
Nothing. We've bought the ability to leave, quote unquote.
Well, I mean, the 39 billion mostly is made up of continued contributions. It needs pointing out that basically while we are in the transition agreement and stuff like that,
Yeah.
We are still paying full whack membership of the EU, even though we're no longer full members and we don't have voting rights. But that has to be taken into consideration when you think of the 39 billion. That I think our contribution is something like 14 billion at the moment, something like that.
Yes.
So if you then take 2 years of that, and 21 months or something like that, then you begin to see that most of it, a lot of it is actually already covered just by that. But we do need to basically ask ourselves, what are we getting for this money? And I mean, as I kind of pointed out with the week that was thing with AA and Sargon, I just basically, I have never kind of been a very sort of hardline Brexiteer or whatever. But in the end, when you look at the deal, you then have to ask yourself, is this something you could enter into? And I think that's when, it's no longer a matter of, okay, there may be merit on both sides. You just kind of look at it and you just go, no, I'm sorry, but this is just not something in the best will in the world you can actually subscribe to. And therefore, yes, I think Theresa May has led us into complete catastrophe.
Yes.
Because,
it does say a lot about the EU themselves and what kind of...
Well, I don't blame the EU.
What kind of thing they are.
I don't blame
It's been unreasonable.
I don't blame the EU in the slightest, given what we know they're trying to achieve, and given we know what their agenda is. They've done nothing but behave predictably.
I think we need to differentiate between the member states of the EU and the EU itself as an organization.
Well, this is why I differentiate it with, I say the EU, meaning the European Union, and I mean Europe, by which I mean the nation states of Europe.
Because I think in this particular case, they have, the EU organization has acted in direct, contravention of the EU states' own interests.
Yeah, the EU doesn't act in Europe's interest.
And that, I could really imagine that this could have serious impact within the kind of organization of the EU itself eventually, because I said right from the start that the EU is not in as strong a position as, people are trying to make out they are, because in Eastern Europe in particular, there is a lot of resistance growing. And if you then try and make an example of Britain for leaving, what are you telling the other states? You're telling them they can't leave.
Yes, and if you make a success,
it is in living memory that they were part of an organization like the Warsaw Pact from which they couldn't leave.
And if you, yes, there are so many people as well. The uninformed electorate, not necessarily the uninformed electorate, but so people like myself, when the vote came around, who wasn't particularly woke on international politics with the EU and so on, who are born into it effectively, but we can't remember a time before it. And we're vaguely aware that we transitioned from basically empire to brief listlessness to European or as part of the European Union, but we don't know anything about the fact that it started out as an economic bloc and that sort of thing, and the single market, and the goal was simply to prevent war between the states, and to provide sort of common trading. We don't realize that. You sort of think that it's been since in the way that it currently is since its inception, and the idea of a European empire is something which, given that the word is not thrown around, is not something particularly egregious to the uninformed voter's mind. They don't really think of that because Europe is our friend. But they don't realize that the EU and Europe are two separate things, and that the EU certainly is not our friend and wants to take away any sovereignty that you have as a citizen to have influence in your own nation. It's the unengaged electorate, says the Wessex Independence Party. Thank you very much. That's a better way of putting it. It's all ridiculous. Used to be called the EEC, didn't it? And so...
Hello.
Oh, good evening, Tailed Feature. Well, how long have you been sitting there?
For 5 minutes.
That's strong.
He's been lurking.
Been lurking, yeah.
Absolutely.
He's been waiting for Mark to shut up so that he can possibly talk about the Tunnocks tea cake wars.
Oh, for goodness sake. What are the Tunnocks tea cake wars?
I think the British has more of a hand in that. Doesn't he have stocks and shares? And
in Tunnocks. Well, he certainly does in the mug industry now, you know.
That's
well,
true.
yes, so it would appear, yes. Yeah,
I
whatever
was-
you do, don't mention Tunnocks and British in the same sentence.
yeah.
Otherwise,
Oh, I see.
north
This
of the
is
border.
this an argument over whether or not they are Scottish or British, and your answer was both?
Yes, my answer dared to be both. Which, yes, I was. There was strong resistance, mainly led from the Boadicea, that is Sue Hulk. Yes, and I resisted manfully, insisting that Tunnocks tea cakes are British.
Strong.
Mhm.
The let me see.
I'm actually going to buy one of your mugs, and I'm gonna put water in the microwave, and I'm gonna keep the tea bag in the whole time, and do all the wrong things, making a cup of tea in your mug.
It's been a pleasure having you on, Tailed Feature. Goodbye.
Oh,
back to the issue at hand.
So we have to.
I know. We talk about this for a little while. Theresa May said that EU workers will no longer be able to jump the queue after Brexit as part of her speech. And now she's retracted the statement because she says she regrets saying this line and said, I should not have used that language in that speech. I suppose because she should have said it in German. Where she said, but she said she stood by her point that migrants should be judged on their skills and not where they come from. So it's fair enough. I do believe as part of her proposed deal we end free movement. Am I right in saying that, Britisher?
It would. I think it would still be going for the entire transition period.
Oh yes, the transition period that will never end until the EU gets its army together and invades us.
So basically, it would still go for the transition period, but then it would end. That's the idea. The transition period, however, can be extended, albeit that it can only be extended once. But it can be extended for an unknown period of time.
Yes.
So it's, you see, I think what most skeptics would look at when they look at this entire agreement with this backstop agreement is once we've agreed to the backstop agreement, once we can no longer get out of the backstop agreement, once we're completely tied into this whole thing, what pressure is there actually on the EU to give us a trade deal?
None.
Basically, they've then got the money. They've got us tied into an arrangement in which we have no say and from which we cannot escape. What actually is within their, where are their interests to actually give us a trade deal? And remember, this situation, this backstop agreement is supposed to be the basis from which to begin negotiation for a trade deal.
It was completely avoidable, utterly avoidable. And
well, I mean, you can only say that this has been completely mishandled. Clearly it was going to be something that in a way neither side likes. Do you understand what I mean? If you have a negotiated situation, then you will invariably going to end up with something like that. And I really did feel that I was trying to look at it from a perspective of, try and just basically judge it on its eventual merit, rather than just sort of, jingoistically, sort of, oh, this is disgraceful,
Yeah.
And in all fairness, you look at it and you just go, no, I'm sorry, but this really just is sort of an abject surrender. You can sense that she was so desperate to come away with some sort of agreement that basically she would just agree to anything.
Yeah.
And clearly that's what you get when that's the impression you get. And you cannot get away from the fact that clearly she must have been negotiating with that stance. They realized it, saw it coming from a mile off, and simply just started making ridiculous demands.
Yeah. What I wouldn't have given to
any kind of concession would nonetheless end up so lopsided because they knew she would never walk away.
What I wouldn't have given to be a fly on the wall in that particular in all of the negotiations. And what I wouldn't have given actually to be in Theresa May's place, because I think I could have hashed out a better deal.
Oh, I think anybody could have hashed out a better deal. It was just, it's the simple thing that you have to be willing to walk away.
Yes.
I mean, we've all seen them, in films or whatever, haggling in the bazaar.
I suppose, yes.
It's when you wave off and walk away from the carpet salesman going, no, ridiculous, I'm not paying that. Then he will suddenly change his mind and call you back, and he will have a lower price.
This is the thing where you go, but I think in Theresa May's mind, leaving with no deal was such a horrendous, horrible alternative.
Well, I think it was also the fact that she had pretty much made it her entire political raison d'etre. That basically, this is what I'm here for. So effectively, if there isn't a deal, then she has to effectively concede that she's failed, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And it's like the deal. But I mean, there are so many ways that she could have spun it to the UK's advantage, and indeed her own political advantage. And it's amazing how, in my mind, she wants to channel the spirit of Margaret Thatcher's Iron Lady persona, but only when it comes to dealing with the British public and not when it comes to international relations.
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, when she was Home Secretary, she was, as usual, as we have had for the last 20 years, she was one of those martinets, Oh, be terribly tough, hang him higher, flog him harder, lock him up and throw away the key, Then she wants to appear like that. But the moment she's up against somebody who is actually another powerful figure of any sort, then she loses any ability to actually correspond with them in a meaningful way. And that's more than likely I might be being unfair here. I don't know, but that's maybe the sign of the bully. One is quite at ease at acting from a position of power, but the moment when you actually come up against your peers, then you just cave in.
I hate it so much. I've had a super chat from Canada, by the looks of things. Fuck off has donated $2 Canadian. Thank you, sir. Says, I sent you a picture on Discord. I think you will like it. So I'm going to share the Discord picture, which is apparently the dagger, or what has he said? A rare photo of the dual-ended dildo Merkel stabbed Theresa May with. So thank you very much for making me say that on stream, and show this glorious image. But yes, funny. There we go.
Yes, you see the things you do for money. That's why your channel is monetized and mine isn't.
What? As if you wouldn't have capitulated. But what a bollocks dagger. Yeah. The needs more angry bees apparently. But there we go. Apparently to get away from the mainstream, I guess, sort of Brexit narrative, some Britons who are living as who have emigrated to Europe have put up an anti-Brexit case. It was brought by 13 people, so it reached far and wide.
I think I saw this.
Brought by a 97-year-old war veteran, and in fact, if I share again, we can get on this because it's a bit more entertaining, shall we say, than us moaning about what everyone's moaning about. So it says, EU judges, no surprise, dismissed a case brought by a 97-year-old war veteran and 12 other emigrant Britons objecting to the Brexit negotiations. Harry Schindler and several others argue that it was wrong for the EU to open the Brexit talks because they and many other expats, immigrants, had been deprived of a vote in the referendum. So apparently they reckon they could have swung it, all 13.
13 votes, yes, definitely.
All 13 of them. All of which have been living outside the UK for more than 15 years. And you just go, well, congratulations.
And again, I mean, given the name of the plaintiff, the others would have just been put on the list.
Yes, of course. Along with, or we'd have had to, there will be a dramatic, re-envisioning of this in about 40 years by some descendant of Liam Neeson, no doubt.
Yes.
But it says the opening of Brexit talks did not infringe their rights, funnily enough. And then this is one of those strange things as well in expat culture, where you go, you haven't lived in the UK for 15 years. Why should you have any say over the way it runs? Doesn't make any sense, particularly as you voluntarily left and emigrated somewhere to retire.
Well, no, I mean, I don't have a problem with British expats having a vote. I mean, they are citizens. I really wouldn't. I wouldn't have a problem with that. I'm not necessarily sure, you know, whether you can provide complete 100% coverage. You know, I mean, if
Well, I mean, you make it illegal.
you know, if the 35 people living in Cameroon get their own polling station, I don't know. Do you understand what I mean?
Oh, it's all postal vote, isn't it?
I'm sure something could be arranged. But then
I wouldn't have a problem with them having it, but I certainly wouldn't stop it now. Their time to complain was when the campaigning was going on. Like, we want to vote in this.
I can't remember who it is that, what nation it is, where voting is mandatory.
So could expats, could these people have voted if they wanted to via post, or just
They need to register to vote, you see. In the UK, they maintain the voting record over time, and so these people would need to have registered to vote in the UK, and they haven't.
Well, yeah, but as I say, I still think it should possibly be. You know, I don't think it would be beyond the wit of man for sort of the embassies to kind of be able to come up with something whereby the expats can actually postal vote or something like that. I really don't think that would be too difficult. So perhaps, you know, for the future, that would be something one should consider. But given that it didn't happen in this one, I just feel, look, folks, I really think you're basically, again, this is basically sort of, you know, clutching at straws because you just don't want to agree with the result. That's really what it is.
Here's the reason a 15-year thing came up, because they've all been outside for more than 15 years, is that the law currently says there's a 15-year time limit on them being able to vote.
Well, yes, then change the law. I don't see a problem with that. I do not see why one should have a random figure at which point one is suddenly less British than people who live in Britain. To me, that doesn't make sense.
Okay.
But as I say, my view would then simply be change the law. I don't see why one should then, you know, wish to sort of ex post facto try and change every previous decision that has been made because those people weren't allowed to vote.
Yeah, why did they not bring this up when the vote was going on? Did they just assume it would go their way, so they didn't bother?
That could well be. It could also be that they just weren't reported and they were complaining. Who knows?
could also be that it's taken this long for the Remainers to find 15 people who are expats.
That is that. But it's, you know, to me, I find if they would declare this vote basically wrong, basically void, simply because they didn't, you know, these 13 people didn't have a vote, well, then what about the last general election? What about the general election before that? I mean, you know, where do you want to draw the line at this? You know, have they been suing for the last general election? If not, why not?
Very true. There is, of course, this other quite bizarre thing going on surrounding Brexit, which is that Theresa May has called for a television debate. Now, have you heard about this?
Well, I mean, it's going to be interesting with the television debate whether she turns up or whether she sends Amber Rudd.
Yes, but the thing with it is I don't understand why we're having it, or why we would have it, because I mean, it's a decision for the parliamentarians, and one in which the general public is not allowed to vote, and yet she wants to have this TV debate where they make their case for all,
of course,
options.
Yes, because she's desperate. You see, when you think of it, when it comes to the television debate in American politics, the television debate now is a complete staple. You know, it's something that has to happen. Over here in Britain, it is always the challenger, or basically the one who is behind in the polls, who wants the debate.
Mm,
And it is the one who is in the lead who doesn't see the reason why.
interesting.
And that's why it has always been mainly been the one who has been in power who didn't see any reason why to have a debate, because that person's always held the higher ground and therefore didn't want to concede it. Because if you go into a debate and you're strictly speaking already winning, then the only thing you can gain is for the other one to be able to land a knockout blow. If you're already winning anyway, why risk it?
Mm.
So the reason Theresa May is now suddenly interested in a television debate is because she's losing. We all know she is going to go into a parliamentary vote which she cannot win. So
she also wants to try and get the public to email or send letters or whatever to their MPs to force them
that she
to
can
vote
somehow
for
land
you.
a knockout blow. She is hoping, she is desperate that something may happen in this debate which may help her to win public support, and that will then lead to the MPs being pressured by the public.
I mean, I hope it happens because I'm going to be dreadfully entertained.
But Nicola Sturgeon wants in on it as well.
Yeah, and so, well, Corbyn wants in, and now Theresa May has been challenged to invite every party because they all want a piece of her.
Yeah.
Jeremy Corbyn said that he's going to relish going to head with the PM in response to reports that she wants to challenge him to a TV showdown. Little does he realise that it's a mud wrestling competition.
I want to see this debate happen, and I want UKIP to send Dankula as their representative.
It's going to be a dance-off, Theresa May's dancing skills.
Can you imagine if Marcus ended up with Dankula, ended up with like complete political legitimacy by going on a debate on TV? That'd be amazing. You can just imagine. I can just imagine the snap. This is a man who sends me pictures of his genitals when he thinks it's amusing.
He would stand there behind his podium, slowly stroking Buddha.
In fact, he'd bring his own leather chair.
Looking at Theresa May going, "We meet at last, Prime Minister."
Thank you very much, Morgan Jensen, for your 10, I believe it's Norwegian kroner, is it? There. Thank you very much. And so on.
This is the first Scandinavian salvo, is it? No doubt the Finns and the Danes are soon to follow.
I think Sutskeren's broke, so he's holding off, you see, so it's fine. I realised earlier I made a comment about ending up at a casino with Dankula, and I just want to point out that there was no gambling taking place because I am quite destitute, but we did enjoy a drink that I didn't pay for, so it's all good. Let me see. The SNP, Lib Dems, Plaid Cymru, and the Greens have demanded to be involved to ensure a range of views is reflected. It's just like a ganging up.
So the SNP, a left of centre party, the Lib Dems, a left of centre party, the Plaid Cymru, a left of centre party, and the Greens, a left of centre party, wish to see a range of views reflected.
Not to mention that Plaid Cymru, which is a party which prides itself on not sending its representatives to the British Parliament, because they do the Welsh Assembly, don't they? But they don't do.
Are you sure? I know that the Northern Irish.
Is that the one? The DUP.
Sinn Féin. They do not send them, but I think Plaid Cymru do.
Maybe I'm getting the two confused then. But there we go. And Conservative MP Bernard Jenkins said, someone who actually supports Brexit must be on the panel. And number 10, funnily enough, declined to comment whilst they pass it over. Let me see. The Prime Minister debates the leaders of the opposition parties regularly on Brexit and was doing so in Commons on Monday afternoon, but did not deny the option was being considered. I don't think she'll get the debate unless she gets everyone there. And yes, she was criticised for missing a TV debate ahead of the last election, which is amazing. Like the election which she had the greatest chance of winning, she managed to lose support through and still just crawl out of with a just
I'm
under
not sure she wanted to win it. I mean, what she picked on old people, she picked on children.
Oh no,
she picked on foxes.
The point was that she was so detached from reality that she either believed that the entirety of the British public hated Jeremy Corbyn so much that they would swallow anything that she said, or she believed that her positions were genuinely so popular compared to those of her opposition that whatever she was saying, people would naturally agree with. And she's also awful in live debate. So she was like, "Oh, it should stand on the merit of that," and it clearly didn't.
Well, the debate I want to see is Theresa May versus Jacob Rees-Mogg.
That'd be entertaining if they can get him on this debate as well. Yes,
but I mean, that'd be the debate I want. I don't want to see Corbyn. I want to see. I want to see.
Well, I'm curious. I'm curious because Mogg is great, but Corbyn hasn't. Corbyn hasn't really outlined in detail a great deal of his stance when it comes to this thing, other than obviously making noises which are opposing Theresa May and how botched the deal is, etc. And his alternative, he's been relatively quiet about. Correct me if I'm wrong. He may have had a huge, long, thick, rambling speech at the Labour Party conference, but I don't believe anything really came out of it in terms of his concrete plan. And I'm curious because there are so many pro-Brexit people in his party. There are so many anti-Brexit people in his party. He himself has obviously been Eurosceptic for almost his entire parliamentary career, until the Remain campaign for some reason. And then now he's sort of flip-flopping a bit. So I don't know, because we don't know exactly his views, I'd like to just hear him articulate it, be forced to articulate it effectively. Plaid Cymru and the SNP say you can't represent the whole of the British public. I mean, certainly more reasonable for the SNP to say that, given that they hold many more seats.
I mean, given that one of them is only Prime Minister and the other one is only the leader of Her Majesty's opposition, I mean, who might they be,
that sort of thing. Vince Cable demanded to be involved, of course. Didn't Vince Cable say something controversial the other day? Can't remember. But there we go. And Caroline Lucas, who's always desperate and gagging for a microphone, pushing for a people's vote, said any debate must be cross-party, featuring a diverse range of voices as long as they're all left-wing, representing every nation as long as it's our nation, as well as every nation. So does she want to have this TV debate with like all the European leaders turn up as well?
So it's going to be a diverse
I assume
panel,
she means like Scotland, England, Wales, and Northern
Yeah,
Ireland.
yeah. As opposed to Viktor Orban turning up on the day and just being like, Hungary's interests must be represented.
Oh, bring on Trump, and he'll talk about how he needs the UK to have a trade deal with the US.
Why don't we make this the UN debate? Like that would be fun. As well as every stance on this deal, our relationship with the EU. Obviously, senior Conservative MP Bernard Jenkins is saying, "Look, you're all Remainers. We need to have Brexiteers represented." And so on and so forth. Did anyone read the letter to the nation that Theresa May put out, by the way?
Yes, I did.
It's interesting. Should we pull that up? And yes, so we'll go through that, and then I think it'll be time to end. But she says, when I became your Prime Minister, the United Kingdom had just voted to leave the European Union. And from my first day on the job, I knew I had a clear mission before me.
That first sentence, I think, was the only truthful thing in the letter.
Yes, I mean her clear mission before her is to sabotage what the people wanted. A duty to fulfil on your behalf, to honour the result of the referendum, not to fulfil the result of the referendum, just to honour it. So she can give it a nod, milady, on the way past. To secure a brighter future for our country by negotiating a good Brexit deal with the EU. Through the long and complex negotiations that have taken place over the last year and a half, I have never lost sight of that duty. Yes, it's been pinned to her dartboard in her office, and she makes sure to throw darts at it every morning. Today I'm in Brussels with a firm intention of agreeing a Brexit deal that will ruin our standing. I'll agree it with the leaders of the other 27 nations. It will be a deal that is in our national interest, which it isn't. One that works for our whole country, all of our people, whether you voted Leave or Remain. it will honour the result of the referendum. She seems very keen for us to know that she's honouring the result of the referendum, despite everything to the contrary. We will take back control of our borders by giving immigration control over to the EU, by putting an end to the free movement of people once and for all. It's like people weren't complaining about free movement particularly. They were complaining about illegal immigration, but let's not go there. Instead of an immigration system based on where a person comes from, we will build one of the skills and talents a person has to offer. That sounds great, but it's not what you've written down. We will take back control of our money by putting an end to our vast annual payments to the EU, because we're going to pay everything that we would pay for the next few years all at once.
Yeah, we're just giving it all to them in one big lump.
No, we're not. It is actually going to be, paid out in just the same way as annual contributions would be. It's not going to go out in one big lump
So
sum.
then that's an outright lie, that sentence.
Vast annual payments, which will continue up until a point which has yet to be determined, because it can be extended. We will be able to spend British taxpayers' money on our own priorities, like the extra 400 odd million a week that we are investing in our long-term plan for the NHS. I have so many issues with the NHS, I can't even begin to approach that statement. That deserves a stream all of its own. We will take back control of our laws by ending the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice in the UK. I mean, just that's the only thing that is there. But the European Commission will still have the power to enact legislation that we have to follow. And that's through the transitory period and beyond.
And the court which oversees the agreement is going to the European Court of Justice.
Yes, as well. Our laws will be made, interpreted and enforced by our own courts and legislatures, provided the EU has signed off on it first. Oh, sorry, she didn't put that last bit in there. We'll be out of EU programs that do not work in our interests, although you won't have a choice on whether or not they're in your interest here. Out of the common agricultural policy that failed our farmers, and out of the common fisheries policy that failed our coastal communities, despite the fact that
Macron has already keep fishing rights.
Yeah, Macron has already been stating that he wants fishing rights.
Yes.
He's saying that he got them, didn't he?
He's saying that's what he's going for. We will be able to design a system of agricultural support that works for us, and we will be an independent coastal state once again with full control over our waters, apart from where Macron wants his fishing boats. And so on. I can't read any more of this. Like, it's just like all of it.
The one thing I would point out right from the start is her mention of long and complex negotiations. Because we're given the impression that, for 2 years they've been at it. And you think, well, hang on a moment, the Chequers Agreement, which was her basis for negotiation, that came around somewhere in July, did it not? When she's actually talking of negotiations, it was the Tory party trying to actually agree a position rather than actually negotiating with the European Union.
Yes, it didn't even start.
Of course, she had all the time in the world, because there was there is no sort of contractual obligation when you need to launch Article 50, the article to actually leave the EU. So for some time we were in a bit of a drôle de guerre, whereby it was kind of, one knew that we were going to leave, but because she hadn't sent the letter yet, we weren't effectively leaving yet. So the 2-year period, which basically began at triggering Article 50, that hadn't started yet. Now, if she wanted to, she could have taken herself 2 or 3 years to prepare the nation. We could have had customs arrangements at the ready. We could have been completely prepared for a hard Brexit, and then she could have triggered Article 50. But she didn't. She triggered Article 50 completely unprepared, having not worked out what Britain's negotiating position was going to be. And then what was the first thing? What was the first thing she did? She then called a general election, because let's waste a few months' time during which we can't actually negotiate.
Position.
And you look at that and you just go, I'm sorry, but this was just amateur hour. And now when we then finally get to see the agreement, which again, you sort of think, well, I'm sorry, but this is not actually that complex. I mean, I know it's 530 odd pages or whatever, but when you actually just boil it down to its summarized form,
Yeah.
you know, I'm sorry, but this doesn't really seem to be rocket science, particularly given that we just seem to have given in everywhere.
She's playing 58D chess. Get with it, man.
58D chess. As the number goes up every time. I'm just going to run through the last few super chats, and I think we're going to have to bring the conversation to a close because it's so frustrating. And unfortunately, there's not much we can do about it from here. So Tragic Vision says, "Have £5, Mr. Poor Student." Thank you very much, sir. Object of Hate has dropped CHF. Do we know what CHF is? And says, "Before the Brexit vote, an expat group took the fight to the Supreme Court to demand the right to vote. They and I were denied it in a gross miscarriage of justice that barely made the papers." So I guess the big thing with that one being that this was a vote which didn't just affect British people at home, it affected all of them abroad as well in the wider context, and they should have had the right to have an influence on that. What do you think about that, Britisher?
Well, as I said before, I think that any person who is of British nationality, irrespective of how long they have been abroad, should be entitled to vote.
Yes,
absolutely. But I would say that it's just simply something that requires a change in the law. It should not be something that should be permitted to invalidate votes or elections that we've already had.
Thank you very much. And then Morgan Jensen has donated 50 NOK. Thank you very much. Says, "To claim the upper hand in a negotiation," I assume he says, not negation, "is a tactic. What is the panel's opinion on Theresa May's stash? Love Norway." Does she have a mustache? Is this a thing?
I can't say I've ever looked closely, you know. I have to go.
I mean, if unless you mean stance, but if I just pop this up again, does she look like she has a mustache?
No, I think this is some kind of misunderstanding.
I don't know. Maybe it is a misunderstanding.
Maybe this was post waxing.
Post waxing. I just don't think that she has the power to.
Well, you know, when it comes to all these super chats having come in, I do expect that people are buying lots of British mugs in order to make up for this.
You don't shill your product here. We'll talk about this afterwards. Anyways, I'm going to bring this episode of Fake Accents to a close. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And thank you to my guests. This week, we've been joined by Base Liz. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
The controversial part of the evening. Thank you for coming on, Discordia.
Thanks for having me also.
And for the brief period and occasional interjection you had, Tailed Feature.
Yes, thank you for inviting me.
And to the Britisher, thank you for coming as always.
Buy Britisher mugs.
There you go. So good night, everyone. Have a great week, and we will see you next time.
I'll give you a mug.